Okay, welcome to our experience. My name is Chad Wurz, Chief Executive at ASCP. This is our podcast of really all things, political footballs, leaders, not bleeders, and pillars of industry. I'm joined by my tag team partner, Tom Hansel of Hansel Health, who's looking at me oddly this afternoon. And we're very excited to have Doug Russell with us as one of our pillars of industry. Doug has been in the long-term care space, I would assume, for your whole career. And has really been an innovator. I got to know Doug way back in my past life being a consultant pharmacist with his pharmacy alternatives, which was unique in the fact that it was specifically designed to service people in IDD, intellectually and developmentally disabled populations and group homes. And I always found that fascinating as well as really rewarding. It's still long-term care. You were still doing consulting, but it was a completely different set of situations and patients. I mean, group homes are a unique thing in themselves with not a lot of licensed personnel, a lot of lay personnel, and then everything that might go along with that when you're talking about storage, delivery, handling, and the clinical aspects of medications. So, Doug, welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Kick it off with, like, we think of the pillars of industry as people that have, it's like a coaching tree. Like, you came out of a coaching tree. I know you came out of Louisville, Kentucky, I believe, which Louisville, Cincinnati, and I'm biased being a Cincinnatian, kind of the cradle of long-term care. That's kind of where things got started. So give us a little history on how you got started and your sort of coaching tree.
Yeah, absolutely. So, 92 graduate from University of Iowa, and
another Iowan. There's a lot of good Iowans.
I'm a Hawkeye. Yeah.
Louisville.
So, when we had the opportunity to look, the beauty of pharmacy is when you're coming upon graduation, you can look at so many different places to go. That's the beauty of our profession. And a lot of family from this area, and I ended up in Louisville right out of college in '92. So, the past 32 years, this is where I've kind of cut my teeth in pharmacy and got things going. So I think when we graduated, or I graduated, I know you guys are pretty close to me in classes here, but when I graduated, your options, this was really pre-PharmD. Your options were clinical, hospital, retail. Right.
Absolutely,
and this was kind of the emergence of long-term care. You started to see Omnicare form around that time. That's around when you saw DNR in Louisville and home care and Beavers and all those guys start to form into this chain and this new profession that was really taken off across the Midwest. Ohio and Kentucky were really, truly the cradle of long-term care. And so when I got out, the usual, I did about 6 months of a tour duty in retail, like a lot of us. I think everybody should probably have that experience. And but I knew coming out of school that I really wanted to go and pursue a career in long-term care pharmacy. I love the service aspect of it, the business-to-business relationships that you form. And it just really felt like a special opportunity. And I kind of view, and I'll go into that, later on, but I kind of viewed things a little differently than just hardcore nursing home. Assisted living didn't even exist back then. So it was primarily nursing home services. So I did about 6 months to a year in retail. And then I started pursuing an opportunity. I was knocking down Dave Wren's door at DNR Pharmacy, and Dave was one of the first Omnicares out there. And they just didn't have any openings. A lot of people that were coming out of Kentucky pharmacy school, they were, really taking off with their PharmD program. He was hiring a lot of PharmD folks. So I was doing everything but begging Dave to hire me. So I jumped in with a retail pharmacy, and I was, we created a long-term care pharmacy division. So at that point in my career, I had no coach, and it was, I was thinking about this the other day. I walked into my first nursing home not knowing how to consult, what to do. And so, this is pre-internet. There was no Google back then that we could look at. And so I did a lot of networking, working with peers. David was even wonderful with some of his advice that he gave me, and reached out to some really seasoned individuals in the industry that really showed me the way and what to do. And then obviously you could see what previous vendors were doing. But what I loved is in the early 90s, it was still white space, in my opinion. And so the opportunity for me to come in without any baggage or any bad habits of, this is the way, very myopic view of this is the way it should be done. It was really white space for me. And I looked at that opportunity to try to be innovative. And so we launched this little independent into a 3,000 bed long-term care pharmacy that served most of greater Louisville, southern Indiana, and those parts. Late 90s, I wanted to really experience what it was like to work for the bigger long-term care pharmacies that were growing. And I was also pursuing some opportunities on the clinical side. So I became an area clinical manager for Neighbor Care. And it was up in Indiana. I had Indiana, Kentucky, and a couple other states, Ohio, Southern Ohio. Worked for those guys. And then around 2001, I decided to hang my shingle. I was 29, 30 years old, and was in Louisville and launched my first, pharmacy operation. And so that's where I started to run across. I know, Tom, we ran into each other that way. You were just down the road south of us and with Omnicare, and Chad started to really get to know you in your skilled care days.
Yep.
And then when we started to work, networking via consulting and with some of the government relations opportunities we had in some of the states. Back then it was Medicaid, so we were always keeping an eye on that reimbursement and that environment. PBMs were becoming more of an issue as we started to grow that business in the early 2000s. So that first pharmacy was a skilled nursing home pharmacy. And same thing, I serve, Kentucky, most of Kentucky, southern Indiana. And I just always felt that there was an opportunity as well for the emergence of home and community-based settings. When you look at skilled nursing homes, there's a team. There's a nursing team, there's physicians, there's all kinds of support to where you have almost a built-in med management program. Mm-hmm. And then I started to see that there wasn't anything of any form or structure in home and community-based settings where there was a tremendous opportunity for long-term care pharmacy. And so I 2005, 2006, decided to exit and sell my first pharmacy ironically to what became Trilogy nursing home chain. And that pharmacy was one of the initial pharmacies that formed Synchrony, which is a large national pharmacy out there now supporting those populations. And in 05, 06, I launched Pharmacy Alternatives. And my mission and passion there was to, really be the tip of the spear in terms of identifying that opportunity in long-term care. And it just took off as fast as I could open. In January of 06, Kentucky opened. In July of 06, Texas opened. And I think every 6 months we were opening pharmacies. Long story short, built that into a big national company that had around 13 pharmacies serving 36 states. So amazing. A lot of fun, a lot of success along the way there. And then, along the way, I think what was interesting is as I started to bring on partnerships with providers and even started working with some private equity firms, that's where I really had some wonderful coaches that taught me more about leadership than I ever thought I could learn. Leading with humility. The way you build a culture drives your strategy, drives your tactical plan, you name it. So that was a great experience for me, is not only building that company, having wonderful people that I got to work with that were on the team that to this day, I still work with those individuals, 20 years later, but to work with a lot of really incredible professionals along the way was outstanding. And so, exited from that opportunity in 2020, and right when COVID hit. Funny story, I was going to have the summer of Doug and enjoy myself for the first time in my career, and COVID hit, so I couldn't travel or do anything. So, but it gave me the chance at that point to kind of reflect on where do I want to go from here. and what I want to pursue. And so really started to, we started to see the emergence of medical at home, which fit right into what I was doing previously with community-based services. So, IDD group homes, home care, home health, serving folks even up into independent living and even assisted living, where there's staff there, they're passing meds, but there's an absence of a med management program across that spectrum.
Yep.
And so that really my focus has broadened, since 2020 in terms of what population I'm trying to serve. And then nowadays I'm trying to build programs that are integrated, that have more than just pharmacy, components to it, that have behavioral health, looking at the individuals we support, from a pharmacy perspective, but holistically in terms of how we can integrate services and products, et cetera. So that's what I've been doing, recently, but that's been the journey. But, guys like Dave Wren that really showed me the way and, helped point the direction in terms of what we can do in long-term care. Those guys they're legends, in this industry in terms of what they've done. But also along the way, incredible mentors that I've had that have taught me the business side, the leadership side, the mission component of serving folks in a community-based setting has been an absolute blast along the way.
I mean, is there anybody you can point to? I always, you could feel it in the room when you were in the room with you could feel the business acumen. Obviously you're a pharmacist, you're building pharmacies or working in pharmacies. But I remember being at a meeting in the Rest Care building in Louisville, and you're pulling out all of this metric data and I'm looking at it like, oh my gosh, like I've got to be paying attention to all this metric data because it's important to Doug and it's important to this business.
Yeah.
But that was like, you were a pioneer then. That metrics are now part and parcel with running a good business. But back then, you're squeezing things out of aberrant computer systems to create the metrics that you're using to guide your business. So you were always ahead of that. Where did that come? When you hung up the shingle, was that just... is that just Doug, the way Doug was brought up, or was there some entrepreneurial force that you leaned on and were like, I can do this, I watched this person do it, or, this is in my blood. Like, where'd that come from?
Yeah, it was a good question. Obviously my family's just a very large family. They're all entrepreneurs. They're all in primarily the construction, engineering, architectural industry. So learned a lot from my family, from the business side and how to run a business and how to build a culture. I think that was the most important thing that was really forced down my throat, was you can't do anything without, really building an incredible culture where folks are on board with your mission, and inspiring them every day is just as important. There's a management component, there's a leadership component. I think what I found was, in the absence of schools back in the early 90s preparing us for the business side, right? They did a wonderful job preparing us clinically, and getting us ready to be pharmacists, but it was almost back then not even accepted to let you go down that business route. So I was always curious. I think that the key, that if I can give any advice to anybody, out of school, be curious. And really look in, how are you running your business? How are you doing your day-to-day management components of looking at key metrics and KPIs and all that good stuff. I learned all I could learn by reading and by learning from folks along the way. That actually is the reason I went to a large company like NeighborCare. Was before I opened my first business, I still felt that I was inept at the business side of it, right? So didn't know, anything about, payroll taxes and accrual accounting, all this stuff that we didn't learn, in pharmacy school. And so, going to a large company and really working really hard to get into a high position with that company to learn how to run a business was my ultimate objective. And once I felt comfortable where I've learned everything I can learn, I know there's more to learn, but I think I know enough to keep the doors open, and how to, get some backing, how to work with wholesalers, to help carry you. for those first 90 days. That gave me the confidence to open that first business. And then, I was very, passionate about that opportunity. And sometimes you gotta be a little sick in the mind to say, hey, I'm going to go open a pharmacy where I've got 6% bottom line, 3% bottom line, very low margin business. There's a reason a lot of people don't open pharmacies, because it's not, to people outside the business, it doesn't look like a very high margin business, not that attractive. But I felt I had enough experience to get that pharmacy up and going. And as I moved along, I learned a lot, unfortunately, from the School of Hard Knocks. I was always leaning on folks for advice, stayed in touch with a lot of other operators. I think peer-to-peer, meeting with these other operators and asking them questions was probably one of the most beneficial things I did as I went through and opened that first pharmacy. But I'll tell you this, when I opened Pharmacy Alternatives and I started to work with companies like Rest Care, companies, private equity firms like Onyx and folks like that, you realize that all these other businesses in healthcare, they're a decade ahead of us in terms of their approach to reimbursement, their approach to advocacy, the way they run their business, how they look at the metrics, and how important data is to them to run these businesses. And, I was lucky enough, these guys were publicly traded, so they certainly had guidelines that they needed to follow, GAAP accounting, all that good stuff. So that's where I learned a lot. And it was just really sitting there having the humility to ask those questions. I don't know what that means. Can you teach me? And so that's where I really realized the importance of data and the importance of metrics and the ability to run the business. And then as technology went on, getting people to come in and write programs and pull data from SQL databases to get the data you want to manage the business. There's not a software package out there that will really give you what you want, right? When it comes to pharmacy, the days of always trying to sync and interface, I've learned, a lot of lessons about the importance of a data lake and open APIs and all this way to grab data. So, as I took that journey with Pharmacy Alternatives, just so many individuals taught me a lot from the business side. And really it was accessing that data. And then Chad, as you know, as we work together consulting, how do I get to the data? Yeah. How do I make it real time? What do we do with it, et cetera? So that's where I really was able to have a lot of success with that. But it was really, truly working with some incredible individuals that taught me those skills.
That's awesome.
There's so much in that. What you said. I mean, I have like 15 more questions here, but before we go through each one of them, I think the question that is most pressing for me is, how are you able to identify these gaps that you see, maybe before other people do? You've always been, I've known you for a long time, and you've been a mentor of mine, because not just for your entrepreneurial mentality and have no fear mentality, but you find those hidden gems. So no one was really doing specifically a pharmacy for group home IDD patients. Not only did you do it, you did it extremely well. You spread it across the nation. It grew dramatically. I remember I called him up one time. I'm like, listen, you're taking this beds for me because it's Rest Care beds, and I understand you have but I'm going to miss budget in my pharmacy. Can you just give me like 60 days, just like slow roll these beds? And Doug graciously decided that he was nice. Yeah, he was going to help me out. He knew he was going to have the business anyway, but And but throughout all the years that we've competed sometimes and then worked together other times, I've just seen you continue to find these niches. And before we get to the other ones that you're doing now, what makes you able? I guess the question is what makes you able to really find these gaps, expose them, and to grow them so quickly?
Yeah. Well, I did. Truthfully, I had a head start with IDD when I was, growing up in high school. My family provided natural supports on the weekends to individuals with developmental disability. My dad was an incredible servant in the community. And so, we were working with those individuals before people even knew what IDD group homes. They didn't even exist yet. Bush hadn't pushed through the Olmstead Act. And And so prior to that, folks were in these large ICF facilities, et cetera. And so I had some exposure then when I could, they'd come with a bag of medications, et cetera. And then fast forward to the early 2000s, and I'm starting to reach out to those individuals from a mission-driven standpoint or an advocacy standpoint. And I think what I've learned and some good advice that I got, and I think it works great when you even look at software and other areas of what we do in healthcare, you start at the customer interface and work backwards. And so often we push from the operational level out. If you go to the customer interface and you're curious, how does this work? What's going on in your world? What I found was high staff turnover, minimum wage employees. They had high school educations or associate degrees, and they weren't quite through college, et cetera. So some wonderful individuals that were very dedicated to a special population, but there was such high turnover and lack of visibility. So, when you look at the group home business, just picture a nursing home where you just take the wings and move them throughout the community, and the administrative office is sitting in the building somewhere downtown. You have zero visibility on paper. And so what I, looked at was, what is it these guys need? And it's a med management program, truly a program where people can come and go. But I know there's safe administration to the individuals we're supporting. And we did everything we could from our end to provide visibility for the operators to be able to support those folks. And so if you just go to the customer interface level and you're curious and you ask the right questions and you have conversations that aren't canned, like when you walk in to visit, with an account, here's what we're doing for you. Here's some data. How are you guys doing? It's really what's going on in your world. What are you guys having trouble with? What are some of your challenges? Forget healthcare for a second, staffing, all that stuff. And so it's those opportunities that I had, and then just learning to be more curious at the customer interface level is when you sniff out these opportunities, and then just kind of sit back at a high level and say, what is it we know? These individuals in the community are on 12 to 16 meds. So for to wrap your mind around it, it's like you think it's going to be easier, but actually nobody has ever come in and given these folks a program to manage their medications as well. And so, what can I do where they're in a world where they can't afford to have a ton of nurses. They don't have relationships with physicians. If there's 35 individuals in a group home population that I'm supporting, there might be 20 different physicians. And so how do you wrangle that and pull that together? So just looking at some of those key areas and then having the courage to say, now how do I serve them, right? Instead of one delivery location, I've got 15 delivery locations, and they're dynamic and they're on demand and they're not scheduled in routine. And so that's where you just kind of got to sit back and figure out, how do I do this? And that's the fun part of what I had the opportunity to do, was looking at these environments and these different populations and applying long-term care services to those populations, and then figuring out how to get the meds to them, right? So that was the fun part that we got to enjoy along the way.
I think what's really cool about what you just said is this whole profession is driving toward this, medication management is what pharmacists do. We just received a grant from the John A. Hartford Foundation, and the John A. Hartford Foundation drives a movement called the Age-Friendly Movement. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It has 4 pillars that are all M's, so it's the 4 M's, and it's medications, mentation, mobility, and then what matters. And it's that what matters part that I think that makes it so unique. But what you just described literally is the business end of what matters. You design your service around what's important to you.
Right.
So if you're doing med management for a patient, what's important to you? Okay, now let's look at the medications, see how they might be affecting your mobility, your mentation. But without the what matters, the client, the patient, isn't engaged. They don't care.
Right.
Yeah.
And what I think is even more interesting in this conversation with you, Doug, is that you have this very your journey in pharmacy has brought you to the time right now, and maybe that's not just you, but a lot of people. But we're at a point where we need to take all the good things that we've done in long-term care and in group home settings, everything that we refined and built and that you learned from asking, what's important to you, to your client. Now we have to use that for this booming older adult population that wants to live at home. What matters to them? I want to live at home. All right, we've got great med management services that we've developed, but even as you said, we don't have a nurse staying with you at home that's going to pass the meds. So we have to make sure you take the meds. So we have to design the med management around what are you capable of doing. Is it a once weekly injection? Is it a daily calculation of insulin? Is it, where are your gaps in your own personal care so that we can deliver a service to you? And then beyond that, there's the whole logistics and how do you, do you use pouch packets? How do you build something that works at an individual level? Because that's so big.
The other things that they need as well, right? Because it comes down to their nutrition, and it comes down to their, maybe those remote monitoring devices for their glucose or their weight and all those other items. And so I know that's kind of your next big focus is kind of combining all that there together, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, it's looking for those gaps, and it's also sitting back and going, when I just recently was working with, in the last few years, it's been value-based care, home and community-based settings, and it is, IDD, arguably into the independent living, assisted living populations, but so much opportunity at home. But just the little things where, you start to, traditionally as long-term care pharmacies, we start to work with our couriers that we've always worked with in the past, right? How do we make this work? And then even when you sit with them, they can't, it's like, I can't wrap my mind around what you're trying to do. Well, stop for 2 seconds and look outside and you see an Amazon truck go by.
Yeah.
And guess what? Our world is now dynamic where it needs to be like Amazon. So we started bringing in couriers that delivered Amazon packages and started working with them on zip codes. We deliver on these days of these zip codes. There's ways to do it, but you got to kind of sit back and go, what else can we do that's outside of what we do with long-term care? And it's a blast. I love looking at it that way and that kind of puzzle to try to put those pieces together to fill those gaps. But this opportunity with individuals in their homes, it's really so similar when you're serving IDD, home care, home health, independent living. At the end of the day, those individuals are so similar in terms of their clinical profiles, their needs. And then, how do we, what's kind of different and unique is, if a nurse is coming into care for them, is it just to look at their ADLs and assist them with shopping or bathing or what have you? There's still minimal support from the med management side. So you can apply. I think what's fun now for us is pharmacy. When you look at what we did in the early 90s, at least when I got out of school, and it's a really exciting time for pharmacists coming out and going, hey, I've got 30 different options of what I can get into and where I can go. But I think the most exciting opportunity for us is applying long-term care services to the home and community-based settings, and then trying to figure out how do we fill those gaps? How do we, what else can we do as a pharmacy, or how do we, layer, new verticals here? Can we do behavioral health? Can we partner with, a psychiatrist or a psychologist to start to support those individuals? And then you start to have that new fun challenge of, well, now how do I get to them? Is it after 5 o'clock at night? Is it through an app of some type? So that's what I'm working on now is just really that full broad spectrum of home and community-based settings. Still love, everything we do in the nursing homes, but I think it's great for us as pioneers for long-term care pharmacy to be able to open these doors to all these new settings where retail traditionally has tried to serve them, and our brothers and sisters in retail, they're doing a great job. But long-term care, we have the capabilities to support these populations and really make a difference, right? In my opinion, you start to look at some of the things recently that you're seeing in certain parts of pharmacy where they're developing these programs. Both the three of us, we did this back in the 90s, so we're applying things we did 20 years ago to a population now. So that's been really enjoyable.
We say that a lot. Pharmacists need to pharmacy again. We need to go back and do what we were trained to do. Like, that's where the opportunity is. I'm glad to hear you talk about pharmacy in such a positive light, because I think when we look out at students and we look out at workforce, all they see is maybe the big box chain pharmacists. And that's not appealing, I think, to a lot. I mean, even us. What would you say to students? I know you talked about being curious. What would you say to students about the opportunity that presents in pharmacy?
I think for that, I want them to know that there are multiple opportunities, right? And so for a lot of these folks, you know, really be ambitious, create your opportunities here. The three of us have operated pharmacies, right? And you know how hard it is to get folks to come into your setting. And once they're there, they're like, this is the greatest thing ever. I didn't know this existed. So I would say there's tremendous opportunities. You know, continue to look for new ways to where we can create more opportunities for pharmacy, particularly long-term care pharmacy in itself. But, you know, we're seeing so many new opportunities where we're starting to get some reimbursement for clinical services, for consulting, all these partnerships where now, because of data, we're able to show, hey, we're reducing rehospitalization by 35%. You know, we know that when someone comes out of a readmission or a hospital admission, 2 meds get discontinued and 2 new meds get started. And most of the time, they don't get those medications filled. So the opportunities are really tremendous out there in terms of what you can do. And there's so many business opportunities. You don't need to have a business background. And this is what I preach a lot to a lot of the new directors and managers that I hire. I prefer you come to me with just really good clinical pharmacy acumen, and I'll teach you the business side, and we'll get you going and get you down that path to where you can read a P&L and you can operate a business. You've got canned metrics that you can look at. So don't be afraid to go into these new areas, because I'm telling you, all of my peers out there, you two include, we all are willing to train these individuals if they'll just come knocking on our door. We just don't get a lot of folks knocking on our door, but there's just so many tremendous opportunities out there that these guys could take advantage of. And you see the frustration, you know, they feel like they're trapped in some of these big box chains. You know, I would say when you get out of school, don't go buy a lot of things in life. You know, try to stay lean and figure out what you want to do. That's probably the best advice I got leaving pharmacy school, was don't go buy this, don't go buy that. You know, don't burden yourself with possessions to where you feel trapped in a job to be able to pay those bills. You know, be able to come out of school, be mobile, experience, you know, different settings. And then once you find that setting you're very passionate about, go after it. But I hope folks realize they don't need to have a business background to be successful in long-term care pharmacy. You know, you can come into that arena, you can dispense. We'll teach you the clinical side. You know, some people think, hey, I need to be specialized in this, or we can teach you that as well. There's so many principles we apply to consulting that'll get you started. You know, the core things we need to do when we're out there working with the customer. It's not always just looking at the medications, right? It's looking at the environment and making those recommendations. So don't be afraid to step into these new experiences. Don't be afraid. If anything, knock on that pharmacy vendor's door. I'd fall out of my chair right now if I got someone calling me up saying, hey, I want to come work for you. You know, you don't get that nowadays. And you're trying so hard to get people to experience a new setting. So I would say, number one, be curious. Number two, just, you know, take that leap and try out. You can always go back and work at a big box chain. You can always go back and do that. But there's so many more rewarding opportunities out there that you can take advantage of in pharmacy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's pretty inspiring stuff.
Yeah, it is.
Right there.
It is. Well, Doug, I mean, thank you so much for giving your time today and talking with us. Inspirational is a great word. You're one of the best of us, and we appreciate your support at ASCP, and we appreciate what you do and what you're going to lead and help us do going forward with this aging population and all the challenges we have in healthcare. It's fun to talk to people that are looking at the problems with an eye on solutions and not looking at the problems and saying, oh, this is just too much. I'm getting out. I'm not doing it. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.
And Doug, I've known you for a long time. I've admired you, and certainly again, you have been one of my mentors, and the reason why is because you continue to pioneer, you continue to persevere, and you create new ways. And so I just admire that so much from me to you, watching someone that says, man, I'm gonna try to figure this out, and it benefits all of us. And a rising tide rises all ships. And so what you're doing is very important for the next generation. And so I just want to tell you, thank you for continuing to push through, find different ways and trails to blaze. It helps us all.
Thank you. And likewise, both of you guys, you've been great peers to know and work with, and back at you. You're very inspirational, what you both have done in your careers. So, it's great getting to know you guys, and great getting to work alongside you for quite some time. So.
Absolutely. Well, and as a father of three that's a little ahead of me, that's also a mentoring moment for me. And it's also nice to know as an association person that you're now really an empty nester, and you have more time to work with ASCP. So I think that's great too.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much. All right.
All right. Thanks, guys. Great seeing y'all.
All right. We'll see everybody next time on the next episode of Our Experience.